Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And is there a pitching mismatch in Game 3 of the NLDS? The numbers for postseason careers would say so for these two starters.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm Connor Thomas, your host. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me for some of my other work in the sports talk radio space. I've been doing sports talk radio on 97.5 The Fanatic here in Philadelphia for 5 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 seasons, and this is my 3rd season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Again, thank you for checking us out. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing wherever you consume this if you're listening in podcast form. If you're on the YouTube and you haven't subscribed yet, or maybe if you're just listening and you want to watch and you want to go to the YouTube, hit that subscribe button. It'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted. Today's episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. So book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. The Phillies, well, they've booked their trip up to New York, and they're all settled in Flushing, Queens, where they'll take on the Mets at Citi Field for the next 2 games of the NLDS, games 3 and 4. And game 3 is a pivotal one. We have it tonight at 5:08 p.m., and there are a lot of things to break down about this game. We're going to start by talking about the pitching matchup. And if there's a mismatch in the Phillies' favor, I think there is. We're also going to talk about Alec Bohm, his removal from the lineup, being back into the lineup, how Rob Thomson's handled it, what all's going on there, and which team needs game 3 more. Which team looks at this and says, this opportunity is more important for us than it is for the other side. It's an interesting theory that may affect how the game is managed tonight. A lot of stuff up in the air for this one. And first, really quick, I want to give a shout out to my guy, Ryan Finkelstein of Locked On Mets. We've done back-to-back crossover episodes, giving you that perspective from the Mets side and from the Phillies side on the series so far. And we also did a preview one, so you can go back in later episodes, or I guess the more recent episodes, and watch or listen to those if you'd like to. But I haven't had a chance really to break things down fully from the Phillies side because our reaction to the first 2 games of the series was done in crossover form. So let's jump into it, really. You're looking at a 1-1 tied series where the Phillies bats have been good for a little bit, but mostly quiet. I don't know. They scored 7 runs, but they all came kind of late, and they came after Bryce Harper ignited stuff with a 2-run home run, and then Nick Castellanos and him went back-to-back. So you might be a little bit worried about the bats, but one thing you shouldn't be worried about with the Phillies is the starting pitching. Zach Wheeler was outstanding. Christopher Sanchez was outstanding. Not quite to the level of Zach Wheeler, but good enough for what you'd expect from a guy making his first true postseason start. And now you've got Aaron Nola in game 3. Part of the reason that Christopher Sanchez threw game 2 was because he has not been good on the road this year. And Aaron Nola is a guy who's been in these environments in the postseason before. He has a track record, not just in the regular season, but also in the postseason over the past couple years. And while he struggled at points in the NLCS and the World Series, he's been really good in the National League Divisional Series of the past 2 years, Aaron Nola has. So should you feel good about having Nola on the mound? Well, that's kind of a loaded question that we ask ourselves every time he steps on the rubber, whether it's home or away. He's a volatile pitcher. He's a guy that can have unbelievably good performances. He's also a guy that could have blow-up performances at points. And it's somewhat of a coin flip of what Aaron Nola you're getting. Now, when you look at it and you truly evaluate Aaron Nola, because you start to take much more logical and prudent approaches to evaluating players in the postseason when it's not a game in June where you're just trying to pick up a game in the standings. No, it's a game in October where if you don't win, you're facing elimination tomorrow night. Yeah, that really raises the stakes, and it kind of changes the way you look at certain players, and you realize something with Nola. Well, are his blowups that bad? If he gives up 3 runs or 4 runs, can you overcome that? Well, you kind of have to. It makes you rationalize how you can find a way to do that. But it also shows you how important it is for him to not have one of those games tonight. On the other hand, for the Mets, they're going to be throwing Sean Manaea. And while that's a name you'll recognize, and he's a guy that has had success this year for the Mets as far as the regular season is concerned, his playoff track record, not remotely to the level of what Aaron Nola's is. Let me give you some numbers real quick on the two guys. So Aaron Nola in the postseason, he has a 3.7 career postseason ERA. He's been really darn good. You might say, well, 3.7, that's not all that great. And you compare it to Wheeler, and you compare it to Ranger Suarez, and you compare it to Sanchez, and some of the numbers the Phillies pitchers put up this year, and you say, well, 3.7, that might not get it done. Listen to Sean Manaea. Sean Manaea has an 0-3 postseason record. And we know win-loss, it's not necessarily on the pitcher. Like, it's a tough, flawed stat to put up against the pitcher. That's why modern baseball uses it less and less to determine a pitcher's worth. But ERA is always going to be valuable. The amount of runs you give up, it truly is the measure of who's a good pitcher and who's not. Sean Manaea's postseason ERA is 10.66. On top of that, he has not been good against this Phillies lineup. His career numbers against these guys, Turner, Schwarber, Harper, Castellanos, Bohm, all of these guys, Realmuto, well, I think he's actually been pretty good against Realmuto, but most of the Phillies lineup has been really, really good against Sean Manaea in their career. So I look at that and I say, wow, that's a major pitching mismatch. Not only is the ERA nearly 7 points of difference between these two guys, but Aaron Nola has made more postseason starts, and you're in a spot where you say, okay, we'll take our chances with Nola against Manaea. Now, Manaea's a lefty, which we know all year has been a trouble spot for the Philadelphia Phillies offense, and it makes the lineup interesting. We're going to talk about Alec Bohm being back in the lineup a little bit later on in the episode, actually coming up in our next segment, but it does have to do with the righty-lefty splits and how you feel about that. Now, it's interesting that I believe, if I'm correct in this, Schwarber, Harper, Turner, Castellanos, Bohm, they've all gone yard off of Manaea in their career. They all have pretty darn good numbers. And those are probably going to be like your top 5 guys that you look at in the lineup today. And Harper's a lefty and Schwarber's a lefty, and they've had solid success against Manaea in his career. So I don't know if those lefty-righty splits carry over quite as much as they did in the regular season against some different guys. Now, he had 184 strikeouts in the regular season in 2024. Sean Manaea did. And that's something that should be kept an eye on, because he's only had 181 and 2/3 innings pitched. Not only because that's like a solid amount, but whenever you see a pitcher that has more strikeouts than he has innings pitched, and the Phillies are a strikeout heavy team, you worry about the chase rate. You worry about helping Manaea out. What you can't do, right? Because the Mets bullpen is taxed. They got to be dog tired, especially Edwin Diaz, who's thrown like 120 some pitches in the last 8 days. That might be okay for a starter, making a start and then getting a long rest. It's not good for a closer. And the rest of their bullpen, well, they've had to fight tooth and nail to get out of Milwaukee and through the first 2 games in Philly, and it was not the cleanest performance by the Mets bullpen. Now, the Phillies bullpen, you could say it wasn't the cleanest performance from them either, and you'd be 100% correct, but at least they're rested. That's why you've got to be patient with Manaea. It can't be a 7, 8, 9 strikeout game. And that's not going to get it done. Now, it can overall if you get up early, and then that's just kind of how the game unfolds. But against Manaea, you've got to get to the bullpen as quickly as possible. Not because you can't get this guy, but because they're so taxed, the faster you do, you give yourself a chance later on in this series as well. Remember, this isn't an elimination game. We'll talk about later on which team needs Game 3 more. And it's a pivotal game. But there's a much better chance that Aaron Nola goes out there on that mound today and puts together a better start than Sean Manaea. Sean Manaea has not been good against the Phillies. Aaron Nola has been pretty solid against the Mets. And the postseason track record for Nola is way better than it is Manaea. So when I look at this from an unbiased standpoint, right? Not the Phillies fans, Aaron Nola could blow up anytime type of thing, but also not the Mets stink, they're going to lose, whatever, typical Philly bravado. I say that it still is, in just a logical reasoning, much more likely that the Phillies get a great start out of Aaron Nola than the Mets get a great start out of Sean Manaea. And with the lesser bullpen and the more tired bullpen, that puts the Mets in a tricky spot. There's the whole factor of pitching on the road, which doesn't seem to bother Aaron Nola all that much, right? We know he's a slow heartbeat type of guy, right? That's the term that the Philadelphia Phillies use to describe guys like Nola and Suarez And I guess Sanchez and Wheeler too. No one in their pitching rotation that you're using in the postseason really gets all that excited out there on the mound. They just go out and they're expressionless and they're stone cold killers. And Nola's another one of those guys. And make no mistake, he is a very, very, very talented pitcher and has proven that over multiple starts in the postseason. And he's also had rough games too. So while everything is variable in baseball and every game's weird and the postseason is a different beast, Aaron Nola has conquered that beast before. Sean Manaea has no postseason wins to his resume. And I know what I told you about win-loss being a pitcher stat and that being flawed, but still, you can't look away from those numbers. It's all we really have to go on until they take the field this evening at 5:08 p.m. up there in New York City. I don't know. I look at it and I say a distinct pitching advantage through all 9 innings, not just with the starter, but with the bullpen as well, bodes well for the Phillies, especially when I've been a guy all season long that talks to you about how in October, pitching is what wins. Well, in the first 2 games, the Phillies got pretty solid pitching to start, and then the bullpen imploded. And that's how you lost game 1, but it's also how the Mets lost game 2. They got a pretty darn good start from Luis Severino. So I think that point stands to reason that when your pitching fades, your chances to win fade. When your pitching is really good, it makes you look like a darn good baseball team in October. And with the advantage in this game, I like the spot the Philadelphia Phillies are in. Doesn't mean I'm not nervous. I'm not feeling like calm and relaxed and saying, I've got no worries about tonight's game. No, I'm nervous as all get out because I know that Zach Wheeler was unbelievable in game 1, and the Mets still found a way to win that game comfortably when everything was all said and done, at least when you look at the scoreboard. They probably didn't feel comfortable doing it, but it's something worth note. I think it's the biggest storyline for today's game, and it's one that should make you feel good if you're a Philadelphia Phillies fan. But coming up next, we're going to talk about another interesting storyline that I don't know how you should feel if you're a Phillies fan. Alec Bohm being sat in game 2 was weird for a lot of reasons. But was it warranted? And is it warranted that he's going to be back in the lineup today? And where will he slot in? All of these questions we'll answer coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let me talk about Booking.com first. Booking.The. They're an official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball, and they can help you enjoy a stay in any of the great U.S. cities out there, maybe even your rival city. It's no secret the Phillies want to visit New York, and they want to play the Mets, and they want to be at Citi Field, and their fans do as well. You, a Phillies fan, you may want to have a stay up there in New York. Listen, you go up tonight for the game, you stay overnight. You got game 4 again up at Citi Field tomorrow. It'd be a perfect little 2-day getaway in the middle of the week if you have the capabilities of doing that. And if so, there's no better way to do it than Booking.com. They deliver exactly the right stay for you. They can help you book a stay that's close to the stadium. They can help you find the best rates. They can make everything work for you. Even if you don't love the city of New York, or rather the baseball team, you can still love the actual city and staying in it. So go ahead and check out Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. Book your vacation, book your baseball trip, book maybe, I don't know, plans for, no, I'm not going to say next series yet. A lot to take care of. But focus on the here and now with Booking.com and the vacation that you want to have. That's Booking.com, Booking.Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we should probably get into this Alec Bohm situation because there are a lot of theories floating around out there of why he did not play in game 2 of the, I almost said wild card series, divisional series against the New York Mets. Part of it is he's in a miserable slump right now. He has not hit the ball well for what feels like a month. Last year in the postseason, he was really rough in spots where they really needed him, and he did not offer protection to Bryce Harper in the cleanup spot, which allowed teams like the Arizona Diamondbacks to work around Harper and not allow him to be as effective as we know him to be when you got to pitch to him. Nick Castellanos has been doing an amazing job at that, but this isn't about Castellanos. He was really good in game 2. But Alec Bohm was really bad in game 2 for the little bit that he played. He was really bad in game 1. And there were thoughts that maybe it could be an emotional decision. Not that Rob Thomson is making a decision based on his emotions, but more that he's making a decision based on Alec Bohm's emotions. We've seen him be mopey before. We've seen him had to be picked up in the dugout by his teammates. We've seen the I bleeping hate this place comments from a couple years ago. I mean, we've seen Alec Bohm be emotional, and sometimes that can bring down a team. And the big statement on the TV broadcast for game 2 was Edmundo Sosa was being placed in the lineup due to energy that he brings. Now, could that mean a subtle way of saying Alec Bohm was moping and that's why he's not playing? Possibly. Could it be that, hey, literally in the baseball sense of the word, you need to create energy for the lineup? You saw what happened when Bryce Harper hit that 2-run home run. Like, everybody woke up. Edmundo Sosa, well, he adds a little bit of, not that Alec Bohm doesn't have pop, but if you're putting together better at bats, maybe you find something there with Edmundo Sosa, who's had big hits in the postseason before. So I get that. I also would have liked to see Rob Thomson stick with his guys, because to me, that is the consistent approach that he's had since he's taken over as Phillies manager for Joe Girardi back halfway through the 2022 season. This was the first instance in a big spot where I saw Rob Thomson go, yeah, I'm not going to stick with my guy. I'm going to pull Alec Bohm one game into a postseason push, even though he was an all-star starter at third base in this past regular season. I know he's been cold, but Rob Thomson stuck with Nick Castellanos through a slump. He's stuck with Bryson Stott through a slump this year. He's stuck with a lot of guys through slumps over his time as Phillies manager, and he's loyal almost to a fault. So if you see it as a fault, maybe it's good that you liked him taking out Alec Bohm. But then it was very interesting. What happens is Alec Bohm gets an opportunity to pinch hit, and he swings the first pitch on Jose Butto, who could not find the strike zone, and pops it up. And that was a terrible at-bat, and he only sees 2 pitches before he gets out in his next at-bat after being inserted as a pinch hitter, and then was placed out in the field. And it was just like, was he pressing because he knew he was getting minimal opportunities and he was upset he got sat? Was he pressing because he's just in a bad spot right now? There's a lot of stuff mentally going on with Alec Bohm that it's hard for us to evaluate from outside the clubhouse, but that's the perspective that we have. And it's what we got to go off of. What I can evaluate based on his numbers is he's not swinging the bat all that well right now. And yet Rob Thomson already said he's going to be back in the lineup for Game 3 tonight. There's been a question about whether or not he moves down in the lineup. Now, the lineup for Game 1 was Schwarber, Turner, Harper, Castellanos, Bohm in the 5-hole. Do you want to keep a hitter that's been struggling that you pulled in Game 2 of your first postseason series in the 5 spot behind Nick Castellanos? Because you could start to talk about, in theory, do they begin to work around Harper and Castellanos and make Bohm beat them? That gets a little bit tricky, and then he's going to have big at-bats, and do you have faith in him to do that? Now, the only guy lower than Bohm in the lineup that I would guess they're going with today that you would potentially move up is JT Realmuto. I'd imagine you have the same top 5 in the lineup. I think Topper's going to put Bohm in the 5 spot, but if he didn't, let's look at the other guys that'll probably play. It'll be Bryson Stott, most likely, at second base. I don't know if they'll think about going with Edmundo Sosa with a lefty on the mound and Sean Manaea. I think Bryson Stott's got to be out there for his defense. And he had the big hit with a triple in Game 2. So you kind of got to ride with him, right? Maybe you put Sosa in, but I'm not moving Sosa to 5th. So regardless of who's there, doesn't really matter for this conversation. I'd imagine it's Austin Hayes in left field today for Brandon Marsh, who has not been good in this series and not been good against lefties. And Austin Hayes was here for a reason, to be a right-handed bat that you use to face left-handed pitchers. So I'd bet Hayes is batting 8th, Rojas batting 9th, but I skipped the 7th spot. JT Realmuto is an interesting option. Do you move JT Realmuto up to 5 and Bohm down to 7? Well, Realmuto has not really been hitting the ball that well lately. And if you put Bohm down there and you do get that pop at the top of the lineup, but Alec Bohm is still in a spot where he can't really find good at-bats, then you're potentially going Stott against the lefty or Edmundo Sosa, who is a bench player, which I like Edmundo Sosa, but he's a bench player. He's not a starter right now for this team, so that's not a guarantee of any type of offensive creation. Then you go with Austin Hayes and Johan Rojas, both guys that could hit, but I don't know. Austin Hayes hasn't really shown all that much as a Philly, even though his track record with Baltimore last year looked really good. And Johan Rojas has his moments, but he's not a true bona fide, consistent hitter at the major league level at this point. You could be looking at, Stott, Bohm, Hayes, Rojas. Is that 4 auto outs if they don't have a good day? Is that too weak of a bottom of the lineup? Is that why JT Realmuto is batting 7th? There's all this stuff to consider. It's a very tricky spot for Rob Thomson that he would not have put himself in if he had kept Alec Bohm in the lineup in Game 2. And yet, that was the decision he made. And we can rip him for it. But bottom line is, whatever buttons he pushed, the Phillies won the game. So faith in Rob Thomson, is it still high? You'll have to let me know in the comments. I believe in the guy. He's been in this spot before. The team's been in this spot before. The players that are out there have been in this spot before. This is not the Phillies' first rodeo. So I've still got to have faith, because what's the alternative? But you may say, man, I don't like some of the stuff that Rob Thomson did with the bullpen and with Alec Bohm and with pulling Christopher Sanchez after just 88 pitches in game 2. And you might look at that and say, Rob Thomson, again, is making questionable decisions in the postseason. I believe he's done a solid job of managing this team through 2 games. I think he'll continue to do so, and I think putting Alec Bohm in the 5-hole and moving him back into the lineup is the right call, just like I think Austin Hayes playing in left field is the right call. And I think I'd stick with Bryson Stott at second base. So Bohm back in the lineup. That's my thoughts on the rest of the lineup. But an interesting theoretical question on, speaking of the managers, how tonight's game could be managed from a pitching perspective depends on which team you believe needs game 3 more. I'll make my case for which team it is coming up as we continue today's episode. But let's talk about FanDuel first, because FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. They're absolutely amazing. It's a perfect time. Baseball playoffs, the NFL season, hockey begins this week, basketball begins in a couple weeks. It is one of the great times of the sports season. I haven't even mentioned college football, which is often rolling with some amazing upsets and some great teams and a lot of money to be made. FanDuel has your best way to get action on all of those sports and all of your favorite teams and games. And they've got a great interface for you to do it. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. All that information, FanDuel has put it all together in the same spot. It's the easiest, most informed way that you can bet on sports. So you'll get started with that, but you'll also get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Again, that's $200 in bonus bets when you place for your first $5 bet. So that's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. And let's talk about game time. You know what's great, right? It is, right now as I'm recording this, 11:44 p.m. Eastern, a.m., sorry, not p.m., man. 11:44 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that means that you have just a little bit over 5 hours until the game starts up in New York. I'm going to look it up right now. You know what? This is great. I think Game Time is going to appreciate that I do this for them. I'm going to type in Citi Field on my phone and see how long it takes to get up there right now. 2.5 hours. So if I was to go on my Game Time app right now and buy tickets to NLDS Game 3, I could be up at Citi Field in 2.5 hours. I could have time to tailgate and I could go into the game knowing that I got a great deal on my tickets. That's how quick Game Time is. Prices actually go down on the Game Time app the closer you get to first pitch. They also have stuff for comedy, concerts, theater, other sports as well. But let's talk about going to Game 3 and how awesome that would be with Game Time. You know what your experience is going to be? You're going to open the app and you're going to see Game Time picks, where they curate the perfect selections to your preferences so you don't have to sift through a whole bunch of tickets. You're also going to be able to see all-in pricing, so the fees don't surprise you at the end. You'll see your price right up front. Seat views, you'll know exactly how your sight lines are going to be at the ballpark, and Game Time will give you the lowest price guarantee. They always do. If you find the same seat or a seat in the same row and section for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time ticket coverage gives you the best, most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB, and you'll even get $20 off your first purchase. It's so good of a deal, you can't afford to not take advantage of it. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. Well, this is an interesting discussion, right? It's a little bit more theoretical, but you'll see why I'm having it. Who needs Game 3 more? Which team do you believe needs Game 3 more? I would argue that it is the New York Mets. And I'm nervous about this game. I'm not just saying this just to say this, but here's why I think the New York Mets need Game 3. Because I believe that the Phillies win Game 3 tonight, they're going to win this series. There is no way in my mind, right, that the Mets are going to, if they lose tonight, either beat Ranger Suarez tomorrow and a strong Phillies bullpen effort where you're probably going to go with a bullpen game of guys that hopefully would be rested, because I imagine if you win tonight, it will be large part because Aaron Nola had a strong performance, saved the bullpen. But you're going to have to stave off elimination against a Phillies team that smells blood in the water and will have beaten you twice. But then you'll also have to go to Citizens Bank Park and face Zach Wheeler, who dominated you in Game 1, and find a way to win another one of those Zach Wheeler starts. That does not seem likely. Now, on the other hand, for the Phillies, if they lose Game 3, well, they'll be facing elimination in Game 4, just like the Mets will. But they'll be on the road, which you might say, wow, that's a tough spot. And Ranger Suarez has not pitched well lately, and we don't know how his arm feels and how much they trust him and all of these questions. Well, guess what? Game 4 is going to be a tough spot for either team facing elimination. You're going to throw the kitchen sink at the other team, trying to find a way to end their season and advance yourself to the NLCS. That becomes somewhat of a wash matchup because the Mets will be quick with the trigger on whoever they start in Game 4 as well, whether it's a closeout opportunity or an elimination attempt by the other team. The difference is Game 5 is a heavy advantage to Philadelphia because they've got it at their place and they've got it with Zach Wheeler on the mound. Like, the Phillies feel good about that. That's why Game 3 is more important to the Mets, because they kind of need to close this out at Citi Field. They don't want to come back for Game 5 at Citizens Bank Park. And any game that it lasts longer, well, they feel worse and worse about their chances. For the Phillies, the longer the series goes, kind of the better they feel about their chances, because the more opportunities the better team gets, the more chances they have to truly, like, for water to find its level and they win. That's my thought process. So how does it affect Carlos Mendoza and how he's going to manage for the New York Mets? Well, it could mean that he's a little bit quicker with the trigger to go to the bullpen tonight. And that could be their undoing, right? Sean Manaea has to go 4 innings for them at least, because their bullpen's crazy taxed. And if he gets into trouble early, well, it might turn into a, hey, we're going to burn the boats type of game. And then you know what happens? Well, Game 4 gets even tougher because you don't have a bullpen. You're going to throw Jose Quintana, and how long does he go? And then Game 5 gets even tougher because, well, no one really recovers that fast. You have one off day, and then you're back at it with a Wheeler start, and you got to throw the kitchen sink in an elimination game. Like, if you're Carlos Mendoza and you believe that you need this game direly, that it's a must-win for the New York Mets. I do not believe this game is a must-win for the Phillies, but I do believe if they win this game, the series will be over. They will win the series if they win tonight's ball game, in my opinion. The Philadelphia Phillies will. So that's why you look at this and say, okay, if they're going to be aggressive and they're going to find a way to try and use everything they can you use that against them? Will their hitters be more aggressive if they feel emotionally that they really need this game? Might be a time for the Phillies to use their own strategy against the Mets. Aaron Nola, breaking balls out of the zone. Make them be aggressive. Will the crowd affect the way? Because it's going to be a raucous environment, I'd imagine, at Citi Field, just because the Mets haven't been home for so long. And I know what happened with the Phillies when they came back in 2022 from the long trip that led to a matchup in the NLDS with the Braves. Game 3 was the Rhys Hoskins bat spike game. I'm expecting it to be loud up there at Citi Field today. And all of that adds to the pressure. Like, the Phillies, it's going to be just, it's a hostile environment for them either way. But the Mets start to get amped up, and the manager starts to see this moment as bigger than what it is. A rookie manager, by the way, Rob Thomson, has been here before. And you say, okay, maybe it'll be some uncharacteristic decisions. And how do you force their hand? It's the same thing we talked about in the pitching mismatch. You cannot let the Mets get away with pitches out of the zone that you swing your way through. You have to make Sean Manaea attack you. You have to work his pitch count. You have to force Carlos Mendoza's hand. You have to let them make the first move to show, hey, we need this game bad. And I'm not saying like the Phillies don't need this game. It's a pivotal Game 3. But that slight change in philosophy between the teams. Hey, we like our guy in Game 5 more than you like your guy in Game 5. We trust our dudes in Game 4. We don't feel like we have to win both games at Citi Field, while you might feel like you have to win both games at Citi Field. That slight change in philosophy could change the entire dynamic of how the game is managed. So something to keep an eye on tonight. That's my theory. But I have heard from some people that say tonight's game's bigger for the Phillies because, well, if the Mets are facing elimination in Game 4, at least they're doing it on their home field. And if you get to a Game 5, anything can happen. It's also a valid point. When it comes to the postseason, there's two sides to every coin, and you got to look at both of them because as we learned through the first 2 games of this series, anything is possible in October. There are weird times, there are crazy at-bats, there are heroes, there are GOATs, and there are going to be some more high-stress, high-leverage innings in this Mets-Phillies series. There's going to be a lot tonight. There's going to be a lot on Wednesday, and whoever loses tonight hopes there's going to be a lot on Friday. But I look at it and I say this is a good spot for the Philadelphia Phillies, and if they win this game, I'll say it one more time, a win tonight is a win of the series in principle because of what the Phillies still have coming down the pike to pitch against the Mets in the next 2 games. Whew, man, I'm nervous. I'm sure you are too. This is October baseball. This is postseason baseball. This is what it's all about, but it never gets easier, folks. It does get much easier to talk to you about it, though. And there's a lot of stuff going around baseball. All the series are tied at 1-1 right now in the divisional series around baseball. You know, you need to talk to about that. The folks on Locked On MLB and Sully, Paul Francis Sullivan, the host of that show, he does a great job. So go ahead and check that out next. They're also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. He'll give you the storylines of everything going on around baseball. But that's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for joining us. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing wherever you get your podcast, subscribing to the YouTube, all of that stuff that really helps us out and get you notifications when new episodes are posted. Hopefully we're talking about a win tomorrow. I've never wanted to wear the victory shirt so bad this year, but this is one that you really, really would like to have. Win or lose. We'll talk to you about it tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.